Welcome, landing crew, to part 2 of my adult autism and girls Q&A. So the video ended up being really long because a lot of you guys had just some really good questions, and so I didn't want to leave out the really good questions or statements. I wanted this to be all inclusive because honestly, I'm not going to be doing a bunch of other videos on this. Like, this basically concludes my autism, I guess. So I wanted it to be as inclusive as possible, but I also wanted a place where if someone wanted just a summary of everything, they had some videos to go to. So let's get back to the Q&A. All right, so Kelly asked, do you think women are better at learning to mask autism symptoms at a younger age? I think for some reason, I don't understand why, but it seems females just naturally can imitate others better. Like, I've seen that with Penelope so much. Like, she learns signs so quickly, she copies what we do, and I mean, she's visually impaired, so she can do all of these things with still having that impairment. I think the difference is also, if you're not aware, a lot of the autistic traits are actually built off of males, boys. So when you take that and you hold it against a female, it's not going to look the same. Like, it's common for autistic females not to have aggression at a young age like boys do. I feel like in order for girls to really be diagnosed at a young age, they have to be pretty severe as far as the supportive needs that they need. For a long time, it was actually believed that girls could not have autism, that it was a boys only disorder. They built this entire construct around boys. If you look at examples of like stimming or lining things up, like they spin the wheels on cars and stuff. Well, what if your little girl doesn't play with cars? Like, Penelope loves cars and she loves spinning the wheels, but what if your little girl doesn't have a brother that has cars? What if instead she loves like twirling hair or twisting something? Like, it's gonna look different in girls, and the examples that they give parents are most commonly with boys. And so when you ask a parent, oh, does she like spinning wheels of a car, they're probably going to be like, well, no, she doesn't really spin wheels of a car. Not really changing up the questioning and giving specific examples that would be applicable to both genders. This one was a good one. This one was a good one. So Kelly also asked, so when people learn to respond to social cues, does that mean they also learn how to feel the associated emotion? Like, if you don't get jokes naturally, can you learn to eventually find something funny? So no. I've learned in social situations that there are certain things that you should laugh at. So when I'm meeting someone new and they're giving a joke, even if I don't think it's funny, I'm probably gonna laugh at it, just being socially appropriate because everyone else is laughing at it. Like, I honestly do not find Lonnie's jokes funny. There are some things that he does is funny. Like, I'm not saying he's not a funny guy. He is a totally funny guy, but he tells a lot of dad jokes that everyone thinks is just like so funny. I am slow to get the jokes, but even once I get them, I'm like, okay, I understand that, but it's just not funny. It's definitely a weird dynamic, but I can't suddenly make myself feel that it's funny. But autistic individuals are extremely empathetic and they are also very compassionate. So as far as like other stuff, like, I naturally feel that. It doesn't take me a lot to be affected by other people's emotions. JJ asks, weird question, but after a hot bath shower, sometimes I love to jump in a freezing cold shower. Feels so good. Would that be considered a STEM? I don't think that'd be considered a STEM, but that probably is a sensory thing, like a sensory need. So Rebecca asked, how do you shut down, or what it feels like for you before, during, and after a shutdown? It kind of builds up, and it's usually anxiety, like, until it bubbles up, until I completely, like, 100% shut down. And during that time, I really can't do anything. I don't have it in me to give anything at that point. And I'm a giver. I'm a goer. I will keep going and I will keep pushing myself until like a shutdown. A lot of times it is, again, anxiety related. I do have meltdowns about twice a year. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's horrible and I hate it. I feel like once I've like had a shutdown, I guess, like, my entire day's ruined anyway. Even once I start to feel better, it just feels icky. You feel like you're failing as a human being. Like, it doesn't feel good. But usually I'll sleep really good that night, and then I'll wake up the next morning and feel refreshed and be like, okay, this is a new day, let's go. Laura B asked, did they keep the ADHD diagnosis? And no, they did not. I have ADHD traits. The cause of it is different. So I was diagnosed with anxiety, autism, and complex PTSD, and they believe that PTSD is the reason why I have ADHD traits. Amethyst said, all of these social rules you have remembered and keep stored away. Does it ever become overwhelming or complicated to remember all of these? Yes and no. So there are some things I forget if There are things I don't encounter a lot and things like that. Like, for example, when I start a new friendship, I kind of have to rewire myself to be very, very intentional. That can sometimes be a little bit exhausting. It's like what everyone does on automatic, I have to do in manual. So I have to manually like do it, but I'm 34 now. I'm used to it. I'm used to having to act a certain way, but it's extremely exhausting. Like, to do what everyone does, but I have to work 10 to 15 times harder. And even after I've done all that, I'm still kind of appearing a little bit weird, a little bit quirky. It sucks. So it's why I don't like being social, like in person a lot of times. It is exhausting. This was such an amazing question, and I'm so glad they asked that. K Farm asked, do you think the bipolar meds messed up your mental health? And yes, I do. During the times that they were like giving me all these different antipsychotics that wasn't working, was putting me on such a high dosage of Depakote. I think at one point they put me on 2,500 milligrams of Depakote because it wasn't working. Never did they think, oh, we got the wrong diagnosis. They just kept upping the meds. During that time, I had behaviors with my mental health that I've never had before, and they rectified themselves once they would take me off of specific meds. Like, it just was one of those things that when you start messing with brain chemistry that doesn't need to be messed with, things are going to happen. This was really good. Okay, so the bipolar diagnosis video was kind of not done like I originally thought it was going to be done, and it was a really hard video to make just because it was that year. 2009 is a really hard year to talk about. It's a year that I grew the most as a person, but it was really, really painful to remember because I wasn't the best person, and I'm kind of ashamed of who I was then. But she said, I thought you'd mention the specific symptoms that led to the misdiagnosis because they are also present in autism, but I guess it was just a case of diagnosis by association because of your mom. So I will quickly go over some of the things that I had and why I didn't meet the bipolar criteria. I am a person that sometimes I would stay up very, very, very late. I'm a night owl, as I said. I have really bad insomnia. I've always been that way. That was what kind of made them think, oh, maybe it's bipolar. But the difference is that I can't go without sleep. I have to eventually get sleep. With bipolar disorder, it is not uncommon for individuals to be able to go like a day or two without sleeping at all. That wasn't me. So another thing is impulsive. Sometimes I can be impulsive. How my therapist explained it to me though is she's like, you have spontaneous ideas. They aren't things that you just think, okay, let's do this tomorrow. You're like, oh, let's do this in a year. Like one time I wanted to go to Ireland and I was like, okay, let's plan 2 years out. And the more I planned it, the more I was like, okay, this is kind of like irresponsible. Like, we're renting still. We need stability for the kids. We should buy a house before going on this international travel trip. I have these random ideas. I'm like, oh, let's do it. And then I start to plan it out and I'm like, maybe we shouldn't do it. Some people would look at that though as mania. It would literally last like a week. Like, it would take a week and I do the math and I'm like, okay, I'm done. And so anytime I would get hyper focused on something, so I would get really obsessed with XYZ for maybe a week or so, or maybe a day. Like sometimes it'd be just like at night, late at night, I like hyper fixate on things, like crazy things. People would be like, oh, you must be going through mania. But honestly, all of it was pinned on 2009. Like, that's what my entire diagnosis was pinned on. 2011 is when I got the diagnosis. So it was two years after the fact. I hadn't had anything like that happen since, and they just used this year to just say, oh, you must have bipolar disorder. I wasn't a person that would go out and spend money. I've always been the opposite. Like, I overthink purchases. I keep things in my Amazon cart forever. I'll have Lonnie go through my Amazon cart. I'll sleep on it before I buy things. I really try to think things through. However, sometimes I will obsess and hyper focus on things. So like when we're getting ready for a Disney trip like that, that's all I can think about. That's all I can focus on. So they would say that that was bipolar disorder, and that was me going through hypomania instead of someone that was just really, really obsessed. Because in my Disney planning, it was never like, oh, let's go to Disney next month or something. It was like, okay, let's go 4 to 5 months from now. Let's plan this out. Let's make sure everything's paid for. And it was the same thing with moving. Our move was very, very, very thought out. I don't like sudden change. And I think part of it might have just been the planning process was like fun. Like, it was just fun to look at vacations for Ireland and different sites that we could go, and we could renew our vows at this location, and just very, very cool. I'm 65% like Celtic. And so it's just really exciting to like plan plan to go to this area where my ancestors once lived. But then when I really thought about it, I'm like, okay, this isn't realistic. Let's move on. Okay, Samantha is asking where she can start to get her 11-year-old diagnosed or evaluated for autism. So it would be the same thing as it would be for any child. You start with their pediatrician, you ask for referral to, it's usually a children's hospital, or if you can find a specific clinic, then that's what I would do. I would find the hospital or clinic you want to go to before you go to the pediatrician, because a lot of times they'll just have their own place that they naturally refer to, and it may not be a place that you want to refer to. Maybe you haven't heard great things about the facilities or the doctors, or maybe they don't accept your insurance, or maybe there's a long waiting list. So it's always good to know that before going in. Paul said, you seem to discount the complex PTSD and lean more on the autism spectrum diagnosis. Maybe you have CPTSD with comorbid ASD. I think this was on my bipolar disorder. I was using autism the most common with this, just because my autistic traits is what caused me really to have the misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder, and that's why I refer to it. My autism is primary. I was not diagnosed with any traits, anything at all with narcissism. It's actually the complete opposite. I do have complex PTSD, and it definitely does affect me, but a lot of my executive functioning skills is from autism as well. And it's really hard when you have both going on. I really couldn't say what affects me more, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, because when I'm going through therapy, my therapist is aware of my diagnoses. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter why I suck at cleaning. It doesn't matter why I struggle with hygiene. I struggle with it, and I need to have a solution and not worry as much about the cause. Okay, so this was a new one that I did not know came through, because I've been a little bit busy lately, so I want to address this. If you are severely impaired, then how do we quantify really affected people, nonverbal people, low IQ people, severe sensory disorder people? Sounds like you went to a pay for a diagnosis doctor. We all know most parents of autistic kids have mild traits like WTF. All right, I never said I was severely autistic. I shared my results. I think he's referring to my Violent. I did score low compared to a typical person, but I scored higher compared to more affected autistic person. I don't have someone else's Violent results. So unless people started sharing their Violent scores with me, then I really wouldn't have anything to compare it to. So just because I got a certain score, that doesn't mean that someone that might be nonverbal or might struggle with it more wouldn't get that. You have no idea what I struggle with and what I don't. You have no idea how much sensory things affect me, and you can't make that determination off of an edited video where I'm sitting here and talking to you. It's gatekeeping. It's not cool. It's not okay. This is the problem we have, is when we have autistic individuals that speak well for many different reasons. Because they present themselves well, everyone assumes they're super high functioning and they don't struggle at all. And then when they share their struggles, it's like, oh, something must be wrong. Before I got diagnosed, people would say, oh, you're definitely not autistic. Okay, well, I have an autism diagnosis now. And they were like, oh, they must have not knew what they were doing. You don't have autistic traits. And then when I share the autistic traits, they're just like, oh, no, you don't. This is just, no, this doesn't seem like autism. This seems like everyone else. And then when I share my scores, then they're like, oh, no, this doctor, you literally just paid for a diagnosis. Because that helps me out so much to have this diagnosis. Like, seriously, other than understanding myself, how does this benefit me in any other way? 10 assessments, guys. 10 assessments, 2.5 months. My husband was evaluated. My mom was evaluated. I feel like I talk about this so much. If it was a pay for diagnosis place, which is illegal, guys, like they don't exist. But if it was one of those places, they wouldn't have put us through 2.5 months of testing. They wouldn't have done 10 assessments. They wouldn't have had to interview my husband, my mom, all of those things. They would have just done the ADOS 2 and slapped a diagnosis on me. This is a clinic we went through, is a highly, highly reputable clinic through the entire area. They are amazing for kids and adults, not just for autism, but for other mental health things. It's an amazing facility, and we are so, so, so lucky that we were able to get in with them. Adults have went to this facility and walked out without an autism diagnosis because they didn't meet the DSM criteria. We have to stop this thing where we tell people because they appear to be more higher functioning that they aren't struggling. Me masking and forcing myself to try to appear a certain way that's socially acceptable, it has given me debilitating anxiety. If you think I function well, go watch a cleaning video. Stop with that attitude. Moving on. Katina Brandt asks, what would they do if both parents are dead and can't interview? And no one is alive that they knew as a child. So this is a common question. Basically, they just work around it the best that they can. They'll ask you questions. If my mom wouldn't have been available for this interview, my sister could have done it, and I was able to recall a lot from my childhood and things like that. So that's basically what they would have to go off of. It's not ideal, but of course it happens. Like sometimes even it may not even be a situation where the parents are no longer living, but maybe the parents don't have a relationship with the child. Like there's so many things that can make it where their primary caregivers when they were younger are not available for an interview. Someone asked, is dependent personality disorder a side effect of early PTSD? Yes, it can be. That's usually what causes it, is trauma, abandonment issues and clinginess and things like that. It's you're afraid that people are going to leave you because that's what people did your entire life. Jessica said, did you ever take medication for ADHD? And if so, did it help? When I was a young girl, I took Ritalin for about a year or two, and then my mom took me off of it because it made me really, really nauseous, and it also made me kind of like a zombie. 1 out of 10, don't recommend. Kristen asked, you talked about moving on from your codependent friends, but with your life now so filled by the time you commit to your dependent children versus your codependent friends, do you think that's also what has relieved you from seeking codependent friends? As everyone knows now that my business has been out there, I recently ended a friendship similar. Noah's been diagnosed with a disability since he was 4. So a very, very long time. I look at like my friends and my kids differently, as I'm sure most people do. I don't look at my kids all like, oh my God, they're going to depend on me for the rest of their life. And it's not like I wanted my friends to depend on me at the same time. Like that's not what I wanted. I wanted the opposite, but subconsciously we have issues with it at the same time. So like my kids, we really push for independence. That's why we have them in so many therapies, because I don't want to be taking care of them for the rest of their life. If I have to, that's what I'll do, but I'm not going to be here forever. So I want them to take care of themselves. So a lot of times like friends depend on us in different ways without us realizing it. And it's nothing I would have ever like wanted. It's nothing that I ever thought was going to transpire. In the situation with these friends that were codependent, I wanted them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I didn't want them to expect me to take care of everything. I wanted them to do those things on their own, and they didn't. It created this toxic relationship that sometimes happens. How I explained it was how I explained it subconsciously, like what was going on. But in both my friends and my kids, I want them both to be independent and to do their own thing and not to rely on me. Honestly, what really rid me from where I was like, okay, I can't do this codependency thing, like they need to do it, is when I had 2 friends live with me back to back. After that, it just like, it traumatized me to a point where I was like, I never want to do that again. And I think slowly through the years, it was such a slow process. It was such a slow process until the last year when I was just ready to let go of all of it. And I was ready to start living my best life and living a healthy life with healthy friends and healthy people around me. Pretty Far 33 asks, since you do not hear things the way they are, do you have trouble spelling? I'm actually an amazing speller, and this is why. I actually have photographic memory. So once I see something, I can basically spell it. There are some things that I still struggle with, but there are words that everyone would struggle with. That's why I always made such amazing grades in school. I could basically memorize things for tests and things. And so I took classes that I didn't soak any of the information up. Like I made A's and B's in Spanish 1 and 2 in college, but I can hardly speak any Spanish. Okay, so this is the last question, and it is from Garrett. Garrett said, Steph, I have a question, and you can answer this in a Q&A. Are you a sensory seeker or a voider? And I'm an avoider for the most part. There are some things that give me life because it gives me sensory, like roller coasters. Like they like literally give me so much joy. I love it so much. I'm not a huge seeker as far as that's concerned, other than like warm water. I really like my bath water like extremely, extremely warm. But other than that, I'm basically an avoider of everything else. But thank you guys for watching this Q&A. This finishes the series. If you guys are having any other questions, I will try to link all the videos mentioned in the description so you can go check them out. And I do hope this answered everything. If it doesn't, I stream on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern each night. Just go to our Landing Crew 8 and you can come ask questions. That's the best time to do it. I try to go through the comments as much as I can, but sometimes it's really, really hard to. So I appreciate you guys watching, and we will see you guys later.
Where you move make me blind. You will always be there. There's no doubt in my mind. You will always be there. Heading out to see ya and leave the